I'm not terribly concerned about the plaster seeping underneath at this point because it'll be such a thin layer I can just very easily break it away. Alright, let's mix some plaster. Okay, so here's the thing about plaster. It is 1 billion times cheaper than rubber. I think I got this 5 gallons of it, or 50 pounds, maybe it was 100 pounds, I don't know, for 20 bucks. It was crazy cheap. So you start with the water. Actually start with a little less than you think you're going to need. And then you kind of sift your powder in. Not literally, I just mean you kind of shake it a little bit so it's broken up. And it's going to build into a little island in the middle. Maybe it is sifting. I don't know. I kind of feel like you need a sifter for it to actually be sifting, but I'll have to look it up later. You can see it's kind of dissolving into the water. Now, ideally, you have the right amount the first time, because you don't want to do multiple layers. That makes it not quite as strong. Although strength is not that big a deal for this particular application, but still like to follow general best practices here. So, adding some more water, some more powder before it starts setting. Still feel like this isn't going to be enough, but let's give it a try. Now remember, we want it so Zombie Bear's nose and little paws are still visible. Maybe it will be enough. No, not quite. Needs a little more. Alright, so you let that set for about half an hour is usually enough time. One quick correction, this is hydrocal, not plaster. I don't know what the difference is. Hydrocal is nicer, harder, stronger. Okay, so it'll heat up as it's setting and then cool off. That's when you know it's done. Like a little bit of clean clay broke through the foil and got on there, but that's pretty easy to clean up. Okay, now when I remove the clean clay out of the mold, I'm going to put it in this container because the amount of clay here will tell me how much rubber I'm going to need to replace it. Here's a quick tip. I like to get big industrial aluminum foil, and then whenever I make too big a mess, I just crunch it up, throw it away, and put out another sheet. So I cleaned up the mother mold made out of hydrocal. Still have our sculpture. Oh yeah, I have to clean it off a little bit. I've got this flat board that I'm going to use as the base. One thing I'm going to do, I'm going to drill a hole in each of these corners for, you'll see why later. Alright, got my holes in. So here's what we're going to do next. I have a can of compressed air. This is really useful for cleaning out all the little bits and pieces of gunk that accumulates, you know, dust and clay particles and stuff like that. You want to make sure that your sculpture is pristine at this point. Same thing with the mother mold. And now I took my clean clay and I put it through a pasta roller. You could just use a roller McDeely doodle thing that people use for baking. And so what I'm going to do is lay down this thin bed of clay. And this is basically going to be the seal that keeps the rubber in. So I'm going to pour the rubber in these holes, and hopefully this will be pressed down on the clay hard enough that the rubber won't seep out the sides. Okay, so here's the trick. You want to make sure that the clay is on there in as even a layer as possible, because you do not want little ripples where the rubber is going to seep under. So you can kind of see that there a little bit. You know what? I'm going to spray this with some mold release real quick. This isn't usually necessary because the silicone hardly sticks to anything, but just in case. It's really good to inhale as much as you can. It's good for the lungs. Now, a flashlight with me, because I can look down in little holes here and just double check to make sure that there's the plaster mother mold is not touching the sculpture. Because if it touches the sculpture, your mold will be completely ruined. So now that I'm confident that it's not touching the sculpture at all, I'm going to press it down. Then just fill in the little seams on the side with more clean clay. Alright, time to talk about rubber. So, from a consumer perspective, there are two basic kinds. For most beginners, if you're a beginner, what you're wanting to get is a 1-to-1 mix, which is where you literally have two equal sized parts. There's a part A and a part B. You mix 1 cup of A to 1 cup of B, and boom, easy. No need for scales or anything like that. There's a product that I just tried called Umoo, I believe, from Smooth On. I think it's OOMOO, and that's kind of designed specifically, I think specifically for beginners. It doesn't need to be degassed in a vacuum chamber, and it is that easy 1-to-1 mix ratio. The reason that I can't use it, the reason that I got this stuff now, is because when it comes to the kind of sculpture that I'm doing here, it's very intricate. It has a lot of little like nibbly parts, little undercuts and stuff like that, and those just tear up Umoo. Umoo is too fragile for that. So depending on what your project is, will drive your decision of what kind of rubber you're going to need. In this case, because I'm doing 100 of them, it makes a big difference. So, like I was talking about degassing in the vacuum chamber, that's kind of an advanced thing, right? Like, you kind of have to build your own vacuum chamber unless you want to spend thousands of dollars, and it's super annoying. but at some point it's worth it. The reason being that if you don't degas most urethane rubbers, you'll get little bubbles in the rubber, and so when you cast the resin in the rubber and you pull it out, there'll be all these little little balls stuck to your sculpture, and it's pretty easy generally, depending on where they are, to just pop them off with an X-Acto knife, sand it down, and it's no big deal. But when you multiply that by 100 and say you've got like 8 or 10 of these little balls on each sculpture, it starts to add up and it starts being worth it. So what I'm doing is I'm using this, I consider it a higher quality urethane, Mold Max 20, and this you have to measure out because it's the ratio is 100 of A to 10 of B by weight, so you have to have a little gram scale and all that good stuff. But really, you can do it with any kind of rubber. You don't have to do this exact stuff, especially if you're just starting out and experimenting with this kind of thing. So, all right, we're gonna mix this up and pour it.